Well, second things being second, we of course talked about the Time Attack Civic yesterday, and today we're talking about the newer shape Civic, a stock, which of course is one of the key selling points of this one over the Time Attack for those who are inclined to tune their own cars, FL5 generation, 2022 model year in the game, of course more of a kind of, you could say, fastback sedan or saloon shape, kind of reminds me of a Kia sort of shape more than a Honda, but a lot of things seem to be going that way these days. It has some pretty cool visual upgrades as well, some very Mugen style stuff, a number of different wings, side skirts, rear skirts, chin splitters, etc. And I've done a bit of a Mugen setup on this one as well. Seems to have been very positively received by the majority of players. You already know certain things going into a Civic, and I guess you could say that means that Honda's done a damn good job of being, if nothing else, very consistent with the Civic Type R over the years. In fact, really, if you look at it, if you compare the Civic's lineage to most other hot hatches, Honda has actually remained more consistent with the Type R than almost any other manufacturer. You've had a number of through lines that have always stayed there. The super high revving VTEC, of course, the manual gearbox, and the front wheel drive chassis. And at least as far as the ones that come to mind, the only other manufacturer that I feel like has kind of had a similar through line in terms of that core authenticity is actually Renault, with stuff like the Clio and the Megane, especially the Megane. The Megane hasn't changed too much from its roots. It's always been a very cool hot hatch and also has quite a lot in common with the Civic in terms of why people like them so much. So what does this one bring to the table? Well, first of all, the price tag is pretty good. 50 grand is not that expensive. The point level is 529, just under 530 technically, so you could do a lot with that. You know, even with tuning, you're well under 600. You're looking at 325 horsepower and 1430 kilos. And that brings me, of course, to the one key thing, in fact, part of two key things really that go hand in hand that has changed about the Civic. And this is one of those things which kind of has to, certainly with each generation of vehicles in general getting bigger than they used to be. Of course, a modern car, for a number of reasons, including size, safety, tech, what the consumer expects from a car when they buy it in terms of, you know, optional extras, etc. Of course, cars are getting bigger and they're getting heavier, which is part of the reason why something like the Mazda MX-5 is so remarkable for still managing to have the weight so low, even compared to the original. This one is a lot heavier than an older Civic like an EK, for example, would be. It's also a lot more powerful, of course. So does that hinder it? Or, like with the Nissan GT-R, is this an occasion where the extra weight does help in some ways? Because not only do you have the extra accessories, the extra ease of life stuff, the physical size of the car, but sometimes that extra weight can actually come in the form of performance enhancements, especially in terms of computerized systems, again GT-R is a prime example, that can help the car through corners. In some cases, even to overcome the inherent problems of a front-wheel drive platform with 300 plus horsepower going through it. Well, on this occasion, it definitely falls into that second camp. In fact, this to me reminds me of what a GT-R could feel like if it were in an alternate dimension a front-wheel drive hot hatch instead of a four-wheel drive supercar or super sports car. And that's not a bad thing, because despite its size and its weight, this thing is a pleasure to work with. The turn-in is very good. You can definitely feel the front-wheel drive chassis, and of course that bit of understeer and a bit of wheel spin, especially if you leave it, you know, completely stock or have it on lower grade tyres that don't quite match whatever amount of power you're running. But even then, the tech that Honda's put into it, the development, at least of course depending on how accurate Gran Turismo is to the real life car. This is not a car that I've driven in real life yet, so I can't say for sure, but from the Civics that I have driven, I drove an FN2 and an FD2, and both of those were superb through corners, so it doesn't surprise me at all if this one is just this good in real life. Having that element of adopting modern tech to improve a car without sacrificing the core of what made it good, like the VTEC, the manual, the front-wheel drive, I think that's actually a testament to how kind of a sleeper Honda is. They're one of those companies that kind of, they don't make a fuss, you know? They just make really good cars, but they don't blow their own trumpet about it. And it's easy to kind of undersell a company like that. I think, to be honest, it's one of the reasons why the NSX has never done that well. The NSX in its original form, the facelift got rid of the pop-up headlights, and even the newest one, which was also, I believe, kind of a sales failure. It was certainly no Nissan GT-R for Honda. I think it's part of the problem. Honda just doesn't have that reputation of being a company that's got the wow factor, which is a shame because they do. Their engineering is fantastic, but they don't shout about it, and there's just this underlying very Lexus-esque self-assurance, but in a very stoic way. Like with the LFA, it was a failure at the time, but now, later on, people have realised how good it was. I think the exact same thing will happen even more so with the NSX over time, and it's why Civics are such legendary cars in the JDM scene. This one will be in 20 years. The existing EGs, EKs, EPs, they are legendary now, with differing prices, of course, depending on generation, but to me, what I like about this is what I've been harping on about, that it manages to stay true to the most important elements of what always made the Civic Type R so beloved, but it also adopts the benefits of newer tech. It keeps up with the times without sacrificing its own identity. That is a very fine line to run, and I think that if you can even get a tenth of that across in a game, unless of course I'm just reading into it, but it's definitely the vibe I get from driving this car, and I would be very curious to drive one in real life to see if that comes across, and I think it probably does. That is very impressive to me. In terms of tuning, well, most of the Hondas don't have crazy tuning potential in terms of being straight line missiles. They're good for their power, but it's not exactly most people's first choice of drag car in a Gran Turismo game, unless you're going against specifically other kinds of car like that. But in terms of track potential, well, as weird as it is to say, this is actually a more forgiving car to just throw around a track than the Time Attack Civic is. That one, as good as it is, definitely takes more of a learning curve to get the best out of it. This one is very forgiving. It feels like it does a lot of the work for you, again to go back to what I said about the GTR connection. So yeah, to me it's actually a fairly simple review. I'm not a huge fan of Type R Civics. I wouldn't even necessarily say I'm a huge Honda fan. As you can tell, I have a huge amount of respect for them, but unlike Porsche, where I already had the respect and then I drove them and I've ended up loving them more and more, that didn't quite happen for me with Honda when I drove them, but I do at the very least have a ton of respect for what they do. They are very, very good at what they do, and yeah, I think it's a good addition to the game. It's a shame that it's only one of 3 vehicles and could easily be lumped in with an otherwise underwhelming update, even without the other 2 in this update, regardless of the Time Attack, regardless of the Mazda. If this just popped up in, like a Gran Turismo Sport pack of 10 vehicles and a track, I think it would be so much better received. Not because each person who uses it likes it more, because most people seem to, but because so many more players would be enjoying the car. I think that's kind of an occasion where Polyphony shoots themselves in the foot yet again with their lack of strategy in terms of releasing stuff like this. You could be generating so much more fandom for a car like this if you were actually putting more effort and putting the effort into the right places of rolling out good updates, the kind of updates that actually get people excited instead of disappointed. But also I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you one of the people who is happy with the car? Maybe do you find it a bit underwhelming, or do you not like it? And of course, if you've already found it to be particularly useful for something, maybe a certain type of track or a certain type of race or point level, of course you could drop that down in the comments. And for those who are currently playing the game, if you haven't checked out the Time Attack events, there is some pretty good money in that as well, if you want to jump into the sport mode section and use a stock one of these to earn some extra credits. Of course, stick around for the final of the 3 reviews tomorrow and for plenty more GT7 content to come, including certainly next week. Then, of course, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.